I'd like to welcome Divya Yerraguntla and Bob Zambon to take the virtual stage to talk about data, digital and wrangling insights across the digital healthcare spectrum. So Divya and Bob, great to see you, and over to you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks for having us. We are very excited to be here today. So we are here today to talk about really the data, digital, and some of the insights that are coming up across our practice every day in the digital healthcare spectrum. A lot of it, we have heard in the last 3 days, we have seen so many innovators, so much data being shared, and so many insights on how this data is being used throughout the healthcare system. So here we are to share some of our insights.
That's awesome. Oh, one of the things that always strikes us, and I think is critical here, is this quote: "One of the most powerful levers of value creation in modern business is a domain-specific application of data and technology." And as we look across multiple different markets, not just health, but you look at finance, transportation, telecommunications, everything. It's really when you're able to leverage data and technology in an effective way that paradigm shifts occur in how we communicate with each other, how we treat patients, how we develop and create new therapeutics as well. And it's kind of the cornerstone, I think, of a lot of the work that we do and how we're thinking about digital health and the future that it brings. So just something to keep in mind as we move through here.
So as we look at our healthcare ecosystem, right, there are 3 key stakeholders that we look at. First is really the patient. How is technology enabling across these stakeholders? And we have heard so much, and that's really what everybody talks about is wearables. There are so many wearables out there that track the vitals for the patients. There are also a lot of applications that help the patients with compliance, adherence. If you have done any kind of decentralized monitoring, you kind of know there is this whole remote patient monitoring that can be done. And of course, now we talk a lot more about the precision medication. You can really isolate a gene and really cure that one patient. And that's really where technology is enabling a lot of the patient side of things. When we talk about physicians, I guess it's been in the making for a while, the EMR, HHR systems, where now patient data is accessible across different physicians, different hospital systems, and of course, AI ML. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but of course, we are extensively seeing the use of AI and ML technology within the diagnosis space, and also just the routine checkup, analysis, and even basic patient health checks. And then, of course, the payer, the third pillar of this system, is really when we talk about technology, they have higher access and lower cost visits through telehealth, which has been, and I heard a couple of presenters today talk about how they have seen 9 million more telehealth visits this year alone compared to last year. So there is a lot of adoption, and I think payers do see a lot of advantage there. Along with that, there's also combined outcomes and treatment data that they can really apply analytics to, and then really start looking at not just how the patient would react to certain medications formulations, but really start looking at outcomes-based contracting as well, which is pretty much what the focus of payers is. So really across the stakeholders, we see technology adoption and enabling functions across all 3 stakeholder groups. And then this is just a slide, it's quite an high chart, but you can see how big this is. And this was presented by DataVant. And this is really the healthcare data ecosystem, right? And we have seen different parties from different parts of this ecosystem present in the last 3 days. So we have different kinds of software companies. We have a lot of different kind of companies helping all of those 3 stakeholders that we talked about, whether it be payers with their claims, whether the labs with patient data, information exchange, government agencies, distribution of the data, pharmacies tracking the prescriptions, to EHR softwares, really tracking everything end to end. And you see this in all of the different segments across board, but this is just to show how many companies are in this space, and there is so much work happening. And we still have a lot of gaps, but at least we are plugging away at some of these gaps every day. And really to bring this home, I really want to talk about one case study, which is based on AI/ML. This is regarding Irvin Eye Hospital. It's based out of Chennai, India. And this was a hospital that does a lot of eye routine exams. They have ophthalmologists. But if you know, India, the ratio of ophthalmologist to patient is very, very low. So having an appointment with an ophthalmologist actually is also a big task to get that appointment. So in this case study, we talk about Google. So Google actually partnered with Arvind Eye Hospital, and they made a AI ML model, which was a real world clinical use model. In this, they hope to increase the volume of screening, which they achieved. And in this model, they actually took 128,000 ophthalmologist evaluated images of the interior of the eyeball. And they trained a deep neural network algorithm. And this was to really detect diabetic retinopathy. And they ran this model with 12,000 images, and it actually exceeded the baseline performance. So when you compare the human versus the AI model, it exceeded. And that really shows that there is so much potential. And now this is actually being used in everyday to screen. And the volume of screening has seen a significant increase from the time they've started using this AI model. So we do talk a lot about how we can look at imaging, how we can improve patient outcomes. But this is a clear example where there is demand is extremely high for ophthalmologists. The supply is very low. So how do we really enable technology to fill that gap and really get the patients the care they need and provide the physician with the right priority of patients, so the one that need the help the most get attention the fastest. And then this is just data point to show, we do talk a lot about real world evidence, but that's point in time. And now when we look at the data that's generated by the patients or person generated health data, it's actually 99% of the data. It's even though invisible, but the key thing here is it's continuous. It's not point in time, it's being collected across board 24/7. And sometimes we don't even know data is being collected, but it is. So if you just look at this, it's 1000x of what data points we had in our previous lives to what we can actually get with the patient generated data right now. And now I'll hand it off to Bob, who will walk us through some of the methodologies and how we use this data and how we look at it, our approach to it.
Great, thanks, Divya. And yeah, I think one of the key things to highlight here too is, we think about real world data as it correlates to clinical trial data, the gold level of data that you can get from a healthcare for improving new therapies and comparing them to one another. When you look at this, if you imagine this as a time scale, clinical trial data doesn't even come up on it, period, because it happens so infrequently. And the amount of data you're getting from real world evidence, the amount of data you're getting from continuous and passive data sources and wearables, more and more are providing a deeper and better picture into the actual healthcare journey that patients go through than just the clinical trial in and of itself, because it's critical to understand that entire patient journey, how they got to from beginning of life through diagnosis with the disease state to treatment and what happens after that, before, during, and after a clinical trial, not just the clinical trial itself and that specific aspect of what they're looking at. What's presented here is how we tend to think about it at Syneos Health. We utilize tokenization and other mechanisms to integrate data together to provide a more comprehensive patient view. And you can see the clinical trial data in there. It's one point. It's a very important point. It's a critical point to have because of the controlled nature of it. But the other aspects of it that come around from wearables, that continuous real-time data, diarying, ePros, all the other information that may be captured, other real-world data that's captured as part of that patient journey is equally as critical in understanding efficacy, safety, targeting particular patient demographics, understanding how within a diverse population, one particular drug or combination of drugs may have very different outcomes in the long run, and how you can look at developing new standards of care driven through all of that data that's the most effective and long-term, and keeping patients engaged over that entire journey. As was mentioned earlier, and with different companies we've talked about already, and different companies that have talked at the event, there's billions of dollars that's being driven into clinical trials technology and just in healthcare technology in general. You have new technology that's helping with electronic data capture, that's helping with data quality, automated reviews and analysis. You have patient recruitment, engagement, patient apps, things that are allowing, we were talking about just recently, telehealth and telemedicine and all those different types of visits, the millions of visits that are happening every year. But even with all of this investment and everything that's going on in healthcare in general, and what you're seeing, there's still, I can speak to it as visiting a doctor's office earlier this week, you're still filling out paper forms all over the place. You're still having to do a very traditional approach to a lot of interactions in healthcare. This is definitely true in clinical trials, where we are digitizing clinical trials, and the vast majority of the companies on the previous slide, they were focused on clinical trials because of all the effort and work that goes into it, and the resources that go into it, and the value that can be driven there. But even with that, there's still large swaths of clinical trial work that's done, and data that's collected, and patient engagement and recruitment activities that are done more traditionally, that aren't digitized, where people are using traditional pen and paper consent forms, not e-consent, to accelerate it, where there may not be a study app that's providing feedback to a patient during a clinical trial on what are the outcomes, what's happening with other patients, what's the next step for me here. And all of these opportunities are really what can revolutionize the experience of healthcare, both for the patients, for the providers, and just more broadly from a payer perspective as well, and understanding what works and what doesn't. And it's an opportunity for us to really evolve how we think about healthcare in general, and highlight the importance from a digital perspective on how that all kind of comes together. Some of the things that we're doing specifically at Syneos and using this type of data for is to look at how we can accelerate and streamline the execution of a clinical study. So going from kind of the larger scale on the left all the way to the more, I'll call it micro, but patient level scale on the right, we use this type of data to understand where country level competition comes into play, where if you're going into a heavily kind of populated therapeutic area or indication, it's important to understand what's going on, where are patients, what kind of treatments are they getting in a particular country, in a particular geography in that country, a state or region, so that you can focus on where you should have a site, so you can recruit those patients better. The more data that we integrate into that process and that analysis, using AI, ML, and other approaches, and the analytics, allows us to develop much more meaningful insights that aren't just point in time selections, but they're predictive in nature, that they are taking into account what happened in the past to help us predict what will happen in the future, so we can do better clinical trial design. And that flows through from picking a region to picking actual sites, and the sites that will be best for a particular study, a particular product, a particular population, from a diversity perspective that was talked about in the previous conversation as well, that you can find the right site for that right population, so that you make sure that your study is actually going to get what you need out of it, where the research that you're doing is giving you the right real world outcomes that you're looking to do as well. And then finally, patient participation and that engagement directly also. So the key part that sometimes I think gets lost a little bit is having a patient be involved and be part of that clinical study, not just going in and getting a therapy, but understanding and having it be an interactive experience where they see, I'm taking something that's experimental. This is what's happening to me. This is what's going to happen with this product that I'm using now. And this is what I helped to move forward. It's very meaningful for many people to be part of a study, to be part of these initiatives, and seeing that they had a role in helping others that are experiencing the same disease state, same issue, healthcare issue as they are, is a very meaningful part to keep people engaged in clinical trials in the long term. But all of this comes together in kind of new ways that I think many people have been talking about for years at this point, where at least I have, where it loops around from the R&D and commercial aspects and all different aspects from the lab to life and the whole life cycle of a product kind of connect together with each other, where one drives the other. You know, it's the pharma industry and biopharma industry. It's very expensive to develop a drug, so there is a need to have that value and the, you know, the revenue coming in to drive the next phase of development. And what's here is just some data opportunities that can be driven. You know, clinical trial tokenization within R&D and in a clinical trial, long-term patient monitoring follow-up, and then into medical affairs as a product launches, and then into commercial delivery from there as well. And what's important is that these are all individual and they stand on their own as opportunities for data to be used. But the key part is that they're all linked together and they all drive each other in some way or another, where by doing clinical trial tokenization and getting real world data together with your clinical data from patients, you enable streamlined long-term patient follow-up. You already have evidence that you're going to be able to use during medical affairs. You have patient and HCP profiles that you can leverage from your commercial program. And you have patient satisfaction and understanding, which allows you to better engage with your patients, collect more data, and drive that back into your R&D program to do label expansion and things along those lines, and really continue that cycle moving forward. So products aren't just developed and approved, they're developed, they're refined, they're improved, and that continues so that we can continue to move forward in how we're treating healthcare issues across the entire spectrum. So that wraps up. I think we're out of time, but appreciate everybody's time and listening and having the chance for both of us to speak with you today.